Good evening. Continuing our discussion on Eye of the Storm, swamped with phone calls, so let's head back to the phones. Round Rock, Texas, you're on the air. What's your question, please?
Yeah, I'd like to know why many tornadoes are formed in the northeast quadrant of the hurricane.
John Hope, I know you know this one.
Well, we think they form in the northeast quadrant because as that comes ashore, it comes ashore very early, and the winds are kind of turned inward by friction in the low levels, whereas the winds above 5,000 feet continue to blow from about the same direction, and that creates a lot of instability in the atmosphere, and this is where the tornadoes form.
Okay, and as we mentioned earlier, they still can be quite intense.
They can be quite intense. Indeed, they can. They're usually not right in the eye wall of the hurricane. If you have a hurricane that's 200 miles an hour or even 150, you don't need to conjure up any tornadoes to explain damage, but the tornadoes are likely to occur out a little bit farther away from the center of the hurricane.
That's one thing, too, that we were mentioning before, that not very many people really go through the direct eye of the hurricane. They experiencing those fringes, and I believe we were talking earlier that if you look at the hurricane where it strikes shore, to the left of that area is where it is less intense, and as we saw on the tape as well. Any comments about how many people or how people feel about evacuation as far as that goes?
Well, I think Wade Geist can explain that better than a lot of people. You talk about people who have experienced a full hurricane. We've only had 2 Category 5 hurricanes ever to hit the United States. Hurricane Camille was one, and Wade Geist was Civil Defense Director in Harrison County, Mississippi even then, and he was right in the eye of this, very likely the worst hurricane that ever hit the United States. And he knows what it's like.
Yes. Experience, of course, is the greatest teacher. And people, I think, all along the Gulf Coast, Texas as well as Louisiana and Alabama, have experienced from the tragedy that we've had in Hurricane Camille in 1969, which was probably the most catastrophic act of destruction in the history of the modern world. We're talking about a 25-foot tide with at least a 10-foot sea on top of that. So any way you slice it, that's a 35-foot wall of water that came crashing over this community, ripping and tearing and just laying everything waste below that level. We're not too concerned about the response of the visitor. The tourists are usually the first of week to leave. We're not too concerned about the guy and gal who has experienced a hurricane, who really knows what a hurricane is all about. It's that person who thinks they've experienced a hurricane. They're on the peripheral zone. And they've experienced the peripheral zone of any storm, you name it. They say, well, I'm a veteran of a hurricane. Those are the guys and gals that we worry about the most and that we try to point to move out and get out of that area.
And you do have the authority to go in and say this is a mandatory evacuation.
Yes, we do in our state. It took 7 years to get that legislation through after Hurricane Camille. We did not have forcible evacuation authority in 1969. We do have it now, and I think our elected officials would not hesitate to use it.
Don Stevens, I believe you as well were involved in Hurricane Camille. Did you run into any problems with the people that you had at your evacuation centers?
No, just the normal problems that we always have when we're opening shelters and you're dealing with a mass number of people. There's a lot of people who are upset and they hate to leave their homes, and of course that's what we're trying to deal with in our shelters.
Now, what exactly does the Red Cross do for these people? It would be very hard to leave your home and know that it would be leveled.
Sure. Well, our main concern right now is just having a mass shelter area for a lot of people. And, of course, our concern is to shelter them and feed them at that time and till at least the storm passes, and then we'll leave the emergency phase and begin a recovery phase based upon the extended damages that occurred in the community.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, Don Stevens from the American Red Cross, Wade Geist from Civil Defense, and the Weather Channel's hurricane expert, John Hope, for helping us help you survive the eye of the storm. And thank you for your questions and your input. Up next, Dave Watson with your Michelin Drivers Report. Good night. I think it went very well. I think